Imagine this. It's Friday night, the weekend has officially clocked in, and you're sitting in your living room, controller in hand, locked in a digital showdown with your best friend Zach. The score's tied, tensions are high, and just when you're about to reclaim your digital honor, your doorbell rings. At first, you think, oh, maybe it's pizza delivery. Maybe, just maybe, the universe is about to bless you with pepperoni and cheesy garlic breadsticks. But no. Instead of melted cheese glory, what you find on the other side of the door is your neighborhood's version of the fun police. Standing there is Miss Reynolds, HOA Queen Bee, with her arms crossed so tightly you'd think she was holding the last secret to immortality. And she's not alone. No, this woman came with backup. On her left, Mr. Whitaker, glasses so shiny they practically reflect your soul. On her right, Mrs. Foster, lips pursed so hard it looked like she was auditioning for a toothpaste commercial. It was like the Justice League, if the Justice League hated basketball hoops, gnomes, and happiness in general. Miss Reynolds doesn't even bother with small talk. No good evening, no nice weather tonight. Nope. Straight to the point, she barks, your visitors need to leave immediately. Excuse me, did I miss the part where my house became a boot camp? Apparently yes, because she explains, with a voice so frosty it could chill your sweet tea, that a brand new HOA rule has been implemented, effective immediately. No visitors after 8 p.m. in Pine Rest Gardens. And here's the kicker, it's now 8:15, 15 minutes past visitor curfew. You, my friend, are officially a criminal in the eyes of the HOA. Hide your board games, hide your snacks, because the fun SWAT team has arrived. Now let's pause for a moment. 8 o'clock. 8 o'clock. That's not a visitor policy, that's a kindergarten bedtime. What kind of suburban dystopia says you can't have a guest over once the streetlights flicker on? Do they expect people to teleport home mid-conversation? Imagine your buddy finishing a plate of nachos, looking at his watch, and sprinting out like Cinderella before his car turns into a pumpkin. But wait, it gets juicier. While they're lecturing you about the importance of peace and quiet, you glance down the street and see Mrs. Dawson's house. And what's happening there? Oh, nothing much, just a full-blown party. Her place is lit up like Times Square on New Year's Eve, cars jammed along the curb, laughter spilling out the windows, music pumping louder than a teenager's headphones. And here's the scandal. Mrs. Dawson isn't just a neighbor, she's an HOA board member. When you point this out, because hello, obvious hypocrisy, Miss Reynolds doesn't even flinch. She barely looks over and says with the audacity of a Bond villain, board members are exempt when conducting community business. Book club is community business. Excuse me, ma'am, since when did Chardonnay and gossip about the Notebook count as official business of the state? If that's a book club, then I'm the next U.S. Poet Laureate. Your blood is boiling, your friends are standing awkwardly behind you, and Zach whispers, bro, everything okay? No, Zach, everything is not okay, because apparently this neighborhood has become North Korea light, and the HOA is Kim Jong-un with a clipboard. But it doesn't stop there. Mr. Whitaker pipes up, sounding like he's narrating a court case. First violation is a warning. Second is a $100 fine. Third is $250. Beyond that, we can place a lien on your property. A lien on your house because your buddy stayed late for a video game session. Let that sink in. That's like repossessing your car because you had dessert after 9 p.m. So your friends shuffle out heads low like they've just been evicted from a speakeasy, and you're left standing there in your own home, staring at the empty driveway and wondering if this is real life or some twisted episode of Black Mirror. But here's where it gets good. This isn't just about one curfew. No, this was the straw that broke the HOA's brittle, hypocritical back. Because when your dad finds out, the construction director with more leverage than a forklift, oh, the story flips. You see, curfews may scare teenagers, but they don't scare a man who controls all the renovation projects in 3 counties. If you thought kicking out a couple of friends was the peak of HOA nonsense, just wait, because when Dad gets involved, he doesn't just read bedtime stories, he reads the fine print of HOA bylaws, and trust me, nothing scares a dictator more than someone who actually knows the rules.
Now here's where the story shifts gears, from annoying neighborhood drama to, oh snap, somebody called in the heavy artillery. Because when the HOA tried to flex their little curfew rule, they forgot one tiny, microscopic, barely worth mentioning detail. Your dad is Richard Hunter. Yeah, that Richard Hunter. Not just some random dad who yells at squirrels in the yard. No, your dad is the regional director at Hunter Construction, the biggest, baddest building company across 3 whole counties. In other words, if it's made of concrete, drywall, or anything that requires a permit, he probably has a say in it. So the next morning, you tell Dad the whole saga. You think he's just going to give you the standard dad response like, "Hang in there, son," or "Ignore them, they'll get over it." Nope, Dad doesn't play that game. You lay out the details, and there's this pause, this heavy, cinematic silence. Then in that deep, baritone construction director voice, he says, "They did what?" And let me tell you, when a man who manages million-dollar projects lowers his voice like that, it's scarier than any HOA fine. The man has dealt with government inspectors, union bosses, and subcontractors who show up late. These HOA clowns, they're about to get steamrolled by a human bulldozer in khakis. The very next day, Dad rolls up to your house like he's going to war, but instead of a sword, he's armed with something even deadlier: paperwork. He's got bylaws, contracts, blueprints, and a pen that looks like it could sign away empires. He sits down at your kitchen table and starts flipping through the HOA documents like it's his morning crossword puzzle. Every so often he mutters things like, "Interesting," or "Oh, that's not going to hold up." You can practically hear the HOA's house of cards collapsing page by page. Then, after what feels like hours, he leans back, taps the paper, and drops the bombshell. Here's your problem. He points out a clause buried in the bylaws. Turns out, any new rules that affect resident property usage, like, say, banning visitors after 8 p.m., require 30 days of written notice and a 2/3 majority vote from all homeowners. Not just a board meeting, not just a shady email sent at midnight, an actual community-wide vote. Translation, their shiny new curfew rule is about as legitimate as a toddler writing laws with a crayon. It's not enforceable, it's not binding, and frankly, it's laughable. The HOA basically shot themselves in the foot, then tried to charge you for the bullet. And Dad, he's loving this. He doesn't even raise his voice, he just smirks, the kind of smirk that says, "I'm about to dismantle these people one clause at a time." He knows the power of paperwork. He knows that no matter how loud someone yells about community atmosphere or neighborhood harmony, nothing trumps black and white legal text. This is the part where you realize HOA tyrants thrive on one thing: intimidation. They bank on the fact that most homeowners won't actually read the bylaws. Because let's be real, most people would rather watch paint dry than spend a Saturday afternoon reading 47 pages of HOA legalese. But your dad, he treats bylaws like bedtime stories. He reads them, memorizes them, highlights them. He's the guy who actually enjoys understanding contract clauses that everyone else ignores. So when Miss Reynolds comes strutting back trying to enforce her curfew again, Dad is already waiting. He's armed not with fists, not with anger, but with knowledge. And knowledge, in this case, is more devastating than TNT. He casually points out the missing notice. He politely asks for documentation of the so-called community vote. He tilts his head and smiles when she can't produce it. It's like watching a lion toy with a gazelle. And here's the best part. Miss Reynolds, queen of the HOA, champion of hypocrisy, starts to sweat. She stammers, she backpedals. She pulls out excuses like emergency provisions and for safety. Dad doesn't even blink. He hits her with the perfect counter. Is having a friend visit after 8 p.m. a safety issue? Boom. Checkmate. You could almost hear her confidence deflate like a sad balloon at a kid's birthday party. This is when you realize Dad isn't just defending your right to have friends over. He's setting the stage for something much bigger. He's showing the HOA that not only do they have no real authority to enforce this nonsense, but also they picked a fight with the wrong guy. Because here's the kicker. Your dad controls nearly every major renovation project in this neighborhood. Roads, centers, pools, clubhouses, you name it. He's got contractors lined up who won't lift a hammer without his say-so. So while Miss Reynolds is busy trying to enforce her fake curfew, Dad is already plotting a checkmate. Because when the HOA messes with the son of a construction director, the fallout isn't just about visitors. It's about million-dollar projects that suddenly aren't getting built. And trust me, that's where the real fireworks begin.
Here's the thing about HOAs. They love to play pretend. They act like they're the gatekeepers of community harmony, but half the time, their rules look less like guidelines and more like a comedy sketch written by control freaks. No basketball hoops in the driveway? Check. Garden gnomes must be shorter than 12 inches? Double check. No friends after 8 p.m.? Triple check. But you know what they really care about? Not your driveway, not your visitors, not even your lawn flamingos. Nope. They care about money. Cold hard, homeowner-funded money. And in this neighborhood, that money was about to funnel straight into a shiny new $1.2 million community center renovation project. Yeah, you heard that right. $1 million+ bucks for a building that already had squeaky floors and an air conditioner that groaned louder than your uncle after Thanksgiving dinner. Their plan was to modernize it. Translation: give themselves a nicer clubhouse to sip wine in while slapping fines on residents. And guess who just so happened to be in charge of the construction companies bidding on that project? That's right, Dad, Mr. Richard Hunter himself. The guy with the power to decide whether those walls ever see a fresh coat of paint. Now, here's where the hypocrisy goes from mildly irritating to grab your popcorn entertaining. While the HOA was busy scheming to funnel homeowner dues into their little palace makeover, they were also busy fast-tracking their own personal projects. Ms. Reynolds, the queen bee herself, backyard renovation, approved in 2 days flat, like literally faster than Amazon Prime shipping. Meanwhile, your neighbor Mr. Garcia, poor guy had been waiting 3 months just to get a deck approved. And not a fancy deck with a built-in hot tub, no, just a regular old platform to put a couple of chairs on. 3 months. Denied, delayed, ignored. This is classic HOA corruption at its finest. The golden rule of Pine Rest Gardens: board members first, everyone else whenever we feel like it. It was like waiting in line at the DMV, except the employees were letting their besties cut in front while you're still sitting there with the sad little ticket in your hand. And the best part? They didn't even bother hiding it. Dad, being the construction director extraordinaire, had access to application records. He literally spread them out on the table like evidence in a courtroom. One look, and the bias was obvious. It wasn't subtle, it wasn't even clever. It was favoritism with all the grace of a toddler sneaking cookies. So, while the HOA was out here flexing their fake authority about peaceful atmospheres and curfews for safety, they were quietly greasing the wheels on their own luxury upgrades. It was less about keeping the neighborhood nice and more about keeping themselves comfortable. And Dad saw right through it. This is where the $1 million problem comes in, because that $1.2 million community center project, guess whose company was the prime contractor being considered? Yep, Hunter Construction. The board thought they were going to boss around the residents, collect fines, and then slide that fat renovation contract across Dad's desk like everything was cool. But Dad wasn't just going to sign off and cash a check. Oh no, Dad doesn't work for tyrants. He teaches tyrants lessons. And let's be real, there is nothing scarier to an HOA than losing control over their pet projects. You can take away their gnome rules, you can argue about fence colors, but threaten their budget, their big renovation dreams? That's like cutting off their oxygen supply. They live for those projects because it gives them power, prestige, and a reason to justify the insane dues they charge residents every month. So when Dad looked at that mountain of paperwork and said, you know, Hunter Construction doesn't have to bid on their projects, that was the moment the board's world started wobbling. Because suddenly, their grand plans for a sparkling new clubhouse weren't looking so shiny. Without contractors, a $1.2 million project is just a sad stack of blueprints gathering dust. Here's the poetic part. They could bully homeowners all they wanted with fake curfews and selective enforcement, but when it came to construction, they needed Dad. And Dad didn't need them. That's leverage, baby. And Dad was about to use it like a sledgehammer. So, while the HOA was busy patting themselves on the back about their big renovation project, Dad made a few calls. And just like that, their $1 million dream turned into a nightmare, because suddenly, no one in the county wanted to touch their projects, not even with a 10-foot pole.
Okay, so let's set the stage. The HOA thinks they've got it all figured out. They've got their shiny $1.2 million project lined up, they're sitting smug at the head of the table, and they're convinced nothing can stop them. In their minds, it's already a done deal. New community center, higher dues to justify it, and of course, bragging rights at their little wine-fueled book club. But what they didn't count on was Dad. And Dad doesn't just push back. He goes full scorched earth strategy. Here's the genius part. Dad didn't storm into a meeting, pound his fists, and demand change. No, he simply picked up his phone. One by one, he made calls to every contractor, plumber, electrician, and landscaper worth their salt in the entire county. And the message was simple. Do you really want to work with an HOA that doesn't follow its own rules? And the answer, unsurprisingly, was a resounding nope. Because let's be real, contractors talk. The construction world isn't some giant faceless machine. It's a tight-knit network where word spreads faster than gossip at a high school prom. And when the biggest construction director in 3 counties starts raising eyebrows about an HOA's shady business practices, everyone takes notice. Suddenly, Pine Rest Gardens wasn't just a neighborhood, it was radioactive. And then it happened. The blackout. The HOA went from having 3 shiny contractors on their shortlist to 0. Zilch. Nada. Every single one pulled their bid, citing business discretion or scheduling conflicts, which, by the way, is contractor code for, we don't like you and we're not touching your dumpster fire of a project. Picture the board meeting where this news dropped. You've got Ms. Reynolds, usually smug and unflappable, suddenly looking like she just realized her debit card got declined at Target. Mr. Whitaker, fiddling nervously with his glasses as though adjusting them will somehow make reality change. Mrs. Foster, probably wondering why she signed up for this HOA circus in the first place. And then, boom. Mr. Whitaker announces to the room, all 3 companies we shortlisted have withdrawn their bids. The panic was instant. This was supposed to be their golden goose, their legacy project, the crown jewel of their reign of pettiness. And now, they couldn't even get someone to fix a door hinge, let alone renovate an entire community center. Residents in the room were confused. Wait, what do you mean no bids? How do you even run $1 million renovation project with no contractors? Answer, you don't. You can't. Without contractors, an HOA's big dreams collapse faster than a poorly built Jenga tower. And let's talk about the alternatives for a second. The only bids they started receiving were from companies outside the county, contractors who didn't know the HOA's reputation yet. But guess what? Those bids came in at 30 to 40% higher, plus travel expenses. Imagine explaining to residents that their already high HOA dues were about to skyrocket just because the board burned every bridge with local talent. That's not community management. That's financial malpractice. Here's where the comedy kicks in. While the HOA is panicking, residents are watching this train wreck unfold like it's reality TV. Picture the murmurs spreading across the room, the side eyes, the whispered, "Did you hear what happened?" Neighbors who never show up to meetings suddenly sitting in the back row with popcorn, enjoying the board's meltdown in 4K. Meanwhile, Dad, calm as ever. He doesn't need to be in the room. He's not throwing tantrums or making demands. He's just letting the power of silence do the work. Because the absence of contractors says more than any angry speech ever could. It's like dropping the mic without even stepping on stage. This, my friends, is the definition of leverage. The HOA wanted to flex their power with curfews, fines, and liens. Dad flexed his power by reminding them that without him, and without the entire contractor network behind him, they couldn't build a sandcastle, let alone a community center. And the best part? The board knew exactly who was behind it. They might not have had proof, but they knew. It was written all over their panicked faces. And that's what made it sting even more. They weren't just losing control of a project, they were losing control of their reputation. And when petty tyrants lose control, what's the first thing they do? They don't apologize. They don't change. No, they double down and bring in the lawyers. Because nothing says we're desperate like hiring a guy in an expensive suit to bark empty threats.
So here we are. The HOA has officially hit rock bottom. Their no visitors after 8 p.m. nonsense has blown up in their faces. Their $1 million community center dream has evaporated faster than a puddle in Phoenix, and the entire neighborhood is starting to whisper, wait a second, maybe these board members aren't as powerful as they think.
At this point, any sane group of people would have admitted defeat, apologized, maybe even thrown in a free barbecue to win back some goodwill. But HOAs? Oh no. HOAs never apologize. Instead, they do what all petty organizations do when they're cornered. They call in the lawyers. Enter Mr. Palmer, a man in an expensive suit with a briefcase probably filled with more intimidation tactics than actual legal arguments. The board struts into your house one morning like they're staging a coup. Ms. Reynolds is wearing her "I'm totally in control" face, which at this point is about as convincing as a plastic crown from Burger King. Mr. Whitaker looks like he's about to faint, and then there's Palmer, sliding his business card across the table like he's auditioning for Better Call Saul HOA edition. He clears his throat and says something along the lines of, "We understand there's been some interference with the HOA's renovation projects." Excuse me? Interference? Sir, the only interference here is the nonsense curfew that kicked my friends out at 8:15 p.m. because apparently video games after dark are a threat to national security. But Palmer isn't here for logic. He's here for intimidation. He hits you with the phrase every lawyer loves to dangle like a sword: tortious interference. Basically, he's accusing your dad of orchestrating a contractor boycott, which in their eyes is some kind of criminal mastermind move. The way he says it, you'd think Richard Hunter was running an underground mafia for electricians and plumbers. And let's pause here for a second. Imagine being the HOA lawyer, sitting across from the son of a construction director and trying to argue that not bidding on a project is illegal. That's like accusing someone of Grand Theft Auto because they didn't buy a Toyota. Newsflash, declining to work with shady people is 100% legal. But Palmer keeps going. He says they're prepared to seek an injunction to force Hunter Construction to fulfill its existing contracts. Bold statement, except for one tiny problem. Dad never signed a contract. Not one. He simply declined to bid, which, again, is perfectly legal. So basically, Palmer was threatening to sue someone for not wanting their business. Bravo! Truly cutting-edge lawyering right there. And here's where things get delicious. Instead of panicking, instead of backing down, you pull out your phone and hit record. Click. Suddenly, every word Palmer says is being documented. You look him dead in the eye and say, "So just to be clear, you're threatening to sue me personally for this?" Palmer stutters, backpedals, and tries to reframe it as outlining potential legal remedies. Oh, sure. And I'm not eating pizza, I'm just engaging in circular bread-based nourishment. The look on his face says it all. He just realized this intimidation tactic has turned into evidence. Because if there's one thing lawyers hate, it's the sound of their own empty threats being played back in court. Meanwhile, Ms. Reynolds is squirming in her chair, probably wondering how her grand HOA empire turned into this circus. At one point, she even tries to offer a compromise. "We'll rescind the visitor curfew if your father resumes business with the HOA. And you know what? That would have been funny if it wasn't so insulting. Like, ma'am, you're offering to stop being tyrannical in exchange for a multi-million-dollar contract. That's not a compromise, that's bribery in a cardigan." Naturally, you don't bite. Because the problem isn't just the curfew. The problem is the entire system of favoritism, corruption, and double standards. One little reversal isn't going to fix the fact that they've been abusing their power for years. And Dad? Oh, he's 10 steps ahead. He's already outlined actual terms. Board resignations, new elections, financial audits, the full reset button. And here's the beauty of it. The HOA can bring in as many lawyers as they want. They can huff, puff, and threaten to blow the house down. But at the end of the day, the only people shaking in their boots are them. Because Dad doesn't operate in fear. He operates in facts, leverage, and an entire contractor network that has their projects locked in limbo. So what happens when the lawyer intimidation flops harder than a reality TV spinoff? Simple. The cracks in the HOA's own fortress start to show. And when one of their own decides to flip sides and spill the secrets, well, let's just say the drama goes from juicy to downright explosive.
If you thought watching a lawyer fumble through empty threats was satisfying, buckle up. Because the only thing more dangerous to a corrupt HOA board than an angry community is their own teammates turning on them. Yep, that's right. Betrayal from the inside. So let's set the scene. After the contractor blackout and the laughable lawyer stunt, the HOA board is desperate. They're scrambling like toddlers in a ball pit, trying to convince everyone they still have control. But here's the thing about corruption. It's like a bad game of Jenga. Pull out the wrong piece, and the whole tower comes crashing down. Enter Mrs. Evelyn Foster. Now, up until this point, she's been the quiet background character of the HOA board. The type who sits through meetings, nods along with Miss Reynolds' tirades, and signs papers without asking too many questions. But somewhere along the line, the guilt, or maybe just the sheer frustration, finally cracks her. Because one night, you get a message out of the blue. A text, short and cryptic. We need to talk privately. At first, you're skeptical. Is this a setup? Is Miss Reynolds about to try some new intimidation tactic? But curiosity wins, and you call the number. To your surprise, it's Mrs. Foster herself, whispering like she's in a spy thriller. She admits she's had enough. Enough of Victoria Reynolds' iron-fisted rule. Enough of favoritism. Enough of watching neighbors suffer while board members cash in on sweetheart deals. And then she drops the bombshell. She has receipts. Not metaphorical receipts, literal ones. Bank statements, invoices, meeting minutes, all the little scraps of evidence that when pieced together paint a crystal clear picture of corruption. Turns out, Miss Reynolds' husband owns Palmer Property Management, the company that just so happens to handle all the HOA's maintenance contracts. And wouldn't you know it, those contracts are grossly inflated. Premium rates for basic services signed off without competitive bids. If this were Monopoly, it'd be like buying Boardwalk at full price while your buddy quietly takes $200 out of the bank every turn. But wait, it gets worse. Mrs. Foster reveals that HOA reserved funds, the money homeowners pay in dues to keep up community spaces, have been funneled into emergency repairs that weren't emergencies at all. Translation? They were disguising personal projects as community expenses. That new patio at Mrs. Dawson's place? Classified as urgent concrete replacement. Mr. Whitaker's guest house remodel, labeled as structural safety upgrade. Meanwhile, residents are getting fined for things like leaving their trash cans out an extra day. This is no longer petty hypocrisy. This is straight-up corruption with a bow on top. And Mrs. Foster? She's done being complicit. Now, let's pause here to appreciate the irony. The board spent months trying to enforce nonsense rules on residents, curfews, gnome height restrictions, basketball hoop bans, all while breaking their own bylaws in the most blatant ways imaginable. It's like a cop pulling you over for speeding while they're doing 90 in the fast lane. And Mrs. Foster knew it. She couldn't stomach it anymore. So she agrees to share everything. At first, she's nervous. She whispers about needing assurances, about not wanting to get steamrolled by Reynolds' wrath, but eventually she shows up at the community gathering in Emma's backyard, clutching a folder thicker than a phone book. She steps up in front of dozens of frustrated neighbors and does the unthinkable. She confesses, "My name is Evelyn Foster, and I've been on your HOA board for 3 years. I need to apologize for what we've done." You could hear a pin drop. And then she starts showing the evidence. One by one, the projector lights up with documents. Invoices to Palmer Property Management, approvals signed off without oversight, personal expenses disguised as emergencies. Each page is more damning than the last. The crowd gasps, groans, and finally erupts in outrage. Suddenly, all the little annoyances, the curfew, the arbitrary fines, the double standards, makes perfect sense. It wasn't about fairness or safety, it was about money. Always about money. And here's the kicker. Mrs. Foster reveals the true motive behind the infamous visitor curfew. It wasn't about maintaining peace. It wasn't about neighborhood harmony. It was a targeted cash grab. They knew younger homeowners were more likely to have friends over late. By enforcing a curfew, they could issue fines, rack up violations, and generate revenue. It was never about quiet streets. It was about fattening the HOA piggy bank. Boom. Mic drop.
betrayal complete. And if you think the neighbors were just going to sit quietly and nod after hearing all that, think again. Because the moment the truth was out, the entire community decided it was time to flip the script. What started as frustration turned into full-blown rebellion.
So far, this saga has been like watching a slow-motion car crash. The HOA tried to flex with curfews. Dad countered with bylaws. They tried to bully with lawyers. Dad flipped it into leverage. And then, boom, Mrs. Foster blew the whistle and exposed their corruption like a whistleblower in a Netflix docuseries. At this point, the neighbors had seen enough. And that's when something magical happened. The residents of Pinecrest Gardens, people who normally waved politely at each other while mowing lawns or picking up the mail, finally realized they had one thing in common. They were all sick and tired of being bossed around by a bunch of hypocrites in polo shirts. Cue the backyard revolt. Picture Emma's backyard that evening. Normally, it's just a cozy suburban setup. Patio furniture, some fairy lights, maybe a barbecue grill that gets used once a month. But tonight, it looks like ground zero for a suburban uprising. Nearly 60 neighbors are crammed shoulder to shoulder, buzzing with energy. People you've barely spoken to suddenly become allies. The air is thick with frustration, yes, but also with hope. For once, the residents aren't on the defensive. They're ready to fight back. Emma, bless her, takes charge like a general at war. She stands on her back porch, rallying the crowd. This is our neighborhood, not theirs. If they think they can keep running this place like their personal fiefdom, they've got another thing coming. The cheers are loud enough to wake every sleeping dog within a 3-block radius. Then Mr. Finch, the retired lawyer, you didn't even know lived down the street, steps up. This man's been quietly tending his roses for years, and now here he is unleashing decades of HOA legal knowledge like it's his secret superpower. He explains that according to state law, homeowners have the right to force a special election with signatures from just 25% of residents. 25%. That's basically the same number of people already standing in Emma's backyard waving their fists in the air. The reaction? Electric. Clipboards get passed around like candy at Halloween. People who haven't signed their own birthday cards in years are suddenly scribbling their names with passion. The petition fills faster than you can say no more visitor curfews. Within minutes, they've blown past the minimum threshold. By the time the night's over, they've got over 50% of the neighborhood signatures, double what they needed. That's not just support, that's a mandate. And the energy in that yard, unmatched. You've got Jeremy, the young dad holding his twins on his hip while shouting about fairness. You've got Mrs. Alvarez, the sweet grandmother, explaining how her grandkids look forward to swimming every summer and how cruel it was to close the pool as a punishment. Even Mr. Lopez, the legendary hermit who never leaves his house, shows up and declares, "I've had enough of this nonsense." When the neighborhood recluse joins the revolt, you know it's serious. Neighbors share their horror stories like battle scars. One woman talks about waiting 6 months for paint approval, while a board member painted their entire house overnight. Another guy admits he was fined for having his mother stay too long, classified as an unauthorized tenant, while Mr. Whitaker's in-laws had been living rent-free in his guest house for over a year. Every story adds fuel to the fire. And then comes the moment that changes everything. Mrs. Foster, clutching her folder of evidence, stands up in front of the crowd and says, "You don't have to take my word for it. Here's proof." She shows the financial records on Emma's projector, and the crowd gasps like they're watching a plot twist in a soap opera. Suddenly, this isn't just about frustration. It's about betrayal. It's about justice. The mood shifts from angry neighbors to determined revolutionaries. They're no longer asking politely for change. They're demanding it, and they're doing it with the power of signatures, evidence, and solidarity. The HOA may have thought they could rule with fear, but fear only works until people realize they outnumber you. And on this night, in this backyard, the residents of Pinecrest Gardens finally realized the truth. The HOA board wasn't untouchable. They were outnumbered, outmaneuvered, and now outvoted. And just when the revolt seemed unstoppable, guess who showed up to crash the party? None other than Victoria Reynolds herself, storming in like a villain at the end of Act 2, ready to claw back control. But she had no idea the tide had already turned. Every uprising has that one moment when the villain storms in, convinced they can still control the crowd with sheer attitude. For the residents of Pinecrest Gardens, that moment arrived when Victoria Reynolds, self-appointed queen of the HOA, marched into Emma's backyard like she owned the place. Picture it. The crowd is fired up, signatures in hand, documents projected on a screen, neighbors bonding over shared frustration. And then, bam, the back gate swings open.
There she is, heels clicking against the concrete, face twisted with rage, eyes darting around like she's ready to sue everyone in a 5-mile radius. Behind her, headlights from her black SUV beam into the yard like she's staging a villain's entrance in a Marvel movie. All she's missing is ominous theme music. The second she opens her mouth, you can tell she hasn't grasped reality yet. "What is this?" she demands, her voice slicing through the chatter. "Who authorized this gathering?" "Ma'am, this isn't a secret cabal. This is a backyard barbecue without the burgers. The only thing people need authorization for here is who brought the chips." But Victoria doesn't stop there. She spots Mrs. Foster, yes, the same Mrs. Foster who just blew the whistle on her, and spits out accusations like venom. "You're conspiring with them. You've betrayed this board." Evelyn, calm as a monk, doesn't even flinch. She simply replies, "It's over, Victoria. We've shared everything." And that's when the real rant begins. Victoria scans the crowd, and you can practically see the gears in her head jamming. She realizes the room, well, the yard, isn't with her anymore. So she resorts to her favorite weapon, blame. Her eyes lock on you, the supposed troublemaker, the one who dared to question her midnight book club parties while she shut down your game nights. "This is all your fault," she shrieks. "Your father destroyed our renovation plans, and now you've turned my own board against me." Let's just pause here for a moment. Imagine being so out of touch that you think one teenager and his dad toppled an entire neighborhood's patience. No, Victoria. You did this to yourself the moment you decided rules applied to everyone except you. It wasn't sabotage. It was justice, marinated in karma and slow-cooked to perfection. And then comes the knockout blow. Mr. Finch steps forward with the petition. Calm, collected, almost smug. We have signatures from over 50% of homeowners calling for the HOA's immediate resignation and a new election. Boom! The crowd erupts in cheers. If this were a movie, this would be the scene where the rebel army raises their flags while the empire crumbles. Victoria tries to scoff it off, muttering about unproven accusations and unfounded claims. But then, the timing couldn't be better. Dad makes his entrance. He's been standing quietly at the gate, watching the chaos unfold. And when he finally speaks, his voice cuts through the noise like a sledgehammer through drywall. "Actually, they can prove quite a lot," he says. The crowd falls silent. Victoria spins around, her confidence faltering as Dad continues. And the county commissioner is very interested in establishing new HOA oversight regulations. They might even name them after you, the Reynolds rules. Savage. Absolutely savage. Watching her composure crack in real time is like watching ice cream melt in the sun. Messy, inevitable, and kind of satisfying. At this point, Victoria's fight is gone. She slumps slightly, her voice softening as she mutters, "What do you want?" It's the phrase every tyrant eventually utters when they realize their power has evaporated. And Dad doesn't miss a beat. The same thing we've always wanted. Fairness. Equal treatment for all homeowners, financial transparency, and yes, the current board's resignation. The crowd roars. The energy is electric. And for the first time in months, maybe years, people feel hopeful. The HOA's reign of pettiness is ending. Not with a bang, but with the sound of neighbors reclaiming their power. Victoria, the once untouchable bee queen, stands there, exposed, cornered, and most importantly, outnumbered. Her rant might have been loud, but the people's voices were louder, and there's no HOA fine big enough to silence a united community. But of course, words are just the beginning. The revolt didn't stop at shouting matches and petitions. No, the next step was the ultimate power play, forcing the board to resign and watching new leadership rise from the ashes.
Every great drama has a climax. The moment when the villain finally realizes the jig is up, the empire crumbles, and the people cheer. For Pinecrest Gardens, that moment was the big resignation. After months of nonsense rules, hypocritical parties, fines, curfews, and corruption thicker than grandma's fruitcake, the HOA board was cornered. They'd been exposed, humiliated, and stripped of their illusion of control. And now? Now it was time for them to do what they feared most: step down. It didn't happen instantly, of course. These people weren't going to just hand over the keys with a smile. No, they dragged it out, clinging to power like toddlers clutching their favorite toy, but the writing was on the wall, and not even Ms. Reynolds' furious rants could erase it. The petition had done its job. The evidence from Mrs. Foster had sealed the deal, and the residents weren't budging. At the emergency meeting called a week later, the community center was packed to the brim. Normally, HOA meetings looked like a ghost town. 5 people, some stale cookies, and awkward silence. But this was standing room only. Neighbors who hadn't attended a single meeting in years were there, arms crossed, eyes locked on the board. The tension was so thick you could butter toast with it. Victoria Reynolds tried to keep her composure, gavel in hand, as if smacking wood on a table could restore her authority. "Let's bring this meeting to order," she said, voice trembling. But before she could even begin her usual power trip, Mr. Finch, the retired lawyer and now unofficial voice of the people, stood up. He didn't shout, he didn't rant. He simply held up the petition like it was the Declaration of Independence and said, "Over 50% of homeowners have signed calling for your immediate resignation. According to our bylaws, this is binding. It's over." Boom. The room erupted. Neighbors cheered, clapped, and even whistled. It felt less like a meeting and more like the finale of a reality TV show where the villain finally gets voted off the island. You could practically hear the imaginary drum roll as everyone waited for the board's reaction. Mr. Whitaker looked like he might faint. Mrs. Dawson tried to protest, mumbling something about unfair targeting, but her voice was drowned out by the crowd. And Victoria? Oh, she put up a fight, at least for a minute. She stood, puffed up her chest, and tried to spin it. "This is a witch hunt. None of these accusations have been proven." And then, like clockwork, Dad stood up from the back row. Calm, cool, collected. "Actually," he said, voice steady, "the evidence has already been reviewed by the county commissioner's office, and they're very interested in investigating further." Silence. The kind of silence that sucks the air out of a room. Victoria's face turned 3 shades of red, her gavel hand trembling. She realized she wasn't just losing power, she might be facing actual consequences. Finally, she slammed the gavel down one last time. "Fine," she muttered through clenched teeth. "I resign." The other board members, seeing the inevitable, followed like dominoes. One by one, they stepped down. Whitaker, Dawson, even the ones who hadn't been directly implicated knew their time was up. When the dust settled, the entire board was gone, swept out in one night by the very community they thought they controlled. The applause was deafening. Neighbors hugged, strangers high-fived, and someone even shouted freedom like it was the 4th of July. After years of pettiness and power plays, the people of Pinecrest Gardens finally had their neighborhood back. And here's the kicker. Within weeks, a new election was held. Fresh faces took the seats. People like Emma, Dr. Morgan, and a few other residents who actually cared about fairness and transparency. Their first act as leaders? Creating an oversight committee to prevent any future nonsense rules from being snuck in without proper votes. No more curfews, no more favoritism, no more wine club exceptions disguised as community business. For the first time in ages, the HOA was working for the people, not against them. And the old board? They faded into the background, their names forever associated with corruption and defeat. In fact, rumor had it the county was considering new regulations nicknamed the Reynolds Rules to prevent boards from abusing their power. Talk about poetic justice. And while the community celebrated their victory, one last scene seals the story with a bow. A simple late-night game night that went past 8 p.m. because nothing says victory like finally breaking the curfew that started it all.
Every story needs a final act. The moment when the dust settles, the heroes take a breath, and life finally feels normal again. For the residents of Pinecrest Gardens, the finale wasn't about fiery speeches, lawyers in suits, or even petitions waved like battle flags. No, it came in the form of something beautifully simple. A late-night game night. Let's rewind. 3 weeks after the big resignation, the neighborhood was transformed. The community center, yes, the same one that had been at the center of all the drama, was finally humming with activity. Hunter Construction had stepped back in, and like magic, the unfixable problems were being repaired. The pool reopened, just in time for the summer heat. The AC was blasting crisp, cool air, no longer groaning like a dying walrus. Neighbors who used to avoid each other were now chatting over coffee, planning a barbecue, and laughing at the absurdity of everything they just lived through. But the sweetest symbol of victory wasn't in the paperwork or the projects. It was in the vibe. The fear was gone. The intimidation was gone. The neighborhood finally felt like a community again. And then came that night. You'd invited your friends over, Zach, Tyler, Emma, Jeremy, the whole crew. The pizza boxes stacked high, soda cans clinking, laughter filling the house. The clock ticked past 8 p.m., and then 9 p.m. No doorbell, no angry knock, no Miss Reynolds on the porch with her arms crossed like an overzealous mall cop. Just peace, joy, and freedom. It wasn't just about playing video games until midnight. It was about the symbolism. For months, you'd been living under the shadow of an absurd rule, one that told you your own home wasn't truly yours after dark. But now you could sit on your couch, controller in hand, surrounded by friends, without fear of fines or threats. And that small, ordinary moment felt extraordinary. Even Dad stopped by, not in construction director mode, but just as Dad. He walked in, grabbed a slice of pizza, and leaned against the counter with a smile. "Looks like you're finally getting your house back," he said. And he was right. Not just your house, but the whole neighborhood. Emma, fresh off her election to the new board, laughed and teased, "Don't get too comfortable. I'll still find you if you hog all the pizza." The room erupted with laughter, because now the idea of the board handing out ridiculous fines was a joke, not a threat. It was a full circle moment. The same HOA that once used fear to drive your friends out was now gone. In its place was a community that had learned the power of standing together. And the proof was right there, in your living room, in the sound of dice rolling, controllers clicking, and friends laughing past midnight. But let's be real. This wasn't just about game night. It was about what that night represented. Freedom, fairness, community. The idea that rules should protect people, not punish them. The lesson that when power is abused, it takes ordinary people standing together to put things right. And while Miss Reynolds might have packed up and left, her moving trucks parked outside weeks earlier, the neighborhood stayed. Stronger, smarter, more united than before. Maybe she didn't learn anything, but the community did. They learned that transparency matters, that favoritism can't go unchecked, that residents have more power than they realize. So when midnight rolled around and you were still laughing with your friends, there was no fear of doorbells, no talk of fines, no curfews looming overhead. Just the joy of knowing the HOA bullies were lost and the people had won. The night ended not with a bang, but with a laugh. A laugh that echoed louder than any gavel. A laugh that said, "We're free." So here's the takeaway. HOAs can be bullies. They can hide behind bylaws, fines, and fake rules, but they're not untouchable. With a little knowledge, a little courage, and maybe a construction director dad who knows his way around leverage, you can take them down. If you loved watching this HOA get humbled, hit that like button, subscribe for more epic HOA war stories, and drop a comment. What's the pettiest HOA rule you've ever seen? Because trust me, no curfew, no gnome limit, no pool closure can match the power of a united community.